Why don't we bring in now our political panel, and joining us both from Melbourne today, a Labor MP, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, and Liberal MP, Keith Wolahan. Welcome both. A quick one for you, Michelle, because we were just linking off that Pat Farmer report. Not sure if Keith can see it, but you are wearing the Yes campaign badge. You're not inspired to hit the pavement yourself for a few Ks?
I might have to actually dust off those runners somewhere in the back of the cupboard and actually have a crack. I think he's coming to Canberra next week or the week after. He
is. That's my understanding. Yeah. You'll probably see him out the front of this building. All right, look, let's push on. And we've got the intergenerational report coming out from Treasury this week. And I suppose afternoon briefing is not a bad place for a forum for what they might call a mature conversation on options around tax. David Littleproud, no less, has invited such a conversation. Michelle Ananda-Rajah, in issuing an invitation to that discussion, what taxes would you throw on the table as worthy of consideration coming out of this report?
Firstly, I wouldn't approach something as complex as the findings in this intergenerational report by reaching for that lever only. I think that, this is a long-range forecasting exercise which is based on a set of assumptions, but some of those assumptions are modifiable. And, it really depends on the decisions we make now in this defining decade after we have emerged from what has been a wasted decade. Now, we know, as other intergenerational reports have shown, that we have an ageing population and that the care economy is going to become more and more important. Now, I think what the Australian people want to hear, though, is that we need to get more bang for our buck. And that means we need to raise productivity. We need to be smarter at what we do. And so we are investing now in skills, particularly in training up people who are going to be working in that care economy. We're also investing in capability such as digital platforms, and this is particularly important for something like aged care and indeed healthcare. More and more Australians will want to stay living in their own home. Now, that can actually be made possible with some of the digital tools that we already have at our disposal, such as remote monitoring of your vital signs. We even have tools that can now detect whether a person falls at home. Yeah. So, these tools simply are already there. They just need to be deployed at scale.
But you don't think, do you think, Michelle, that there's a revenue problem around some of the social services that inevitably will be required? We can't even begin to imagine what they might be. You're mentioning one technology here, sure, but there'll be much more to cross our paths in the next 30 years.
So that's why, we're doing now the hard work. We've set up an aged care review to look at a more sustainable way of funding aged care going into the future. We've also put in a whole suite of reforms around the NDIS after the neglect of the coalition decade. And one of those is a report that will be coming out in December of this year by the architect, the father of the NDIS, Professor Bruce Bonyhady. And in addition to that, we're looking at how we can make our economy more competitive, how we can actually grow that pie by reindustrialising Australia, by investing in things like onshore manufacturing and clean, cheap energy, which in turn brings manufacturing to our shores, which is what we need.
All right. Well, Keith Wolahan, I'm mindful I haven't yet got to you a question yet, but look, on your country cousins, David Littleproud and the National saying that they'd like to be engaged in a mature conversation. Are you on the question of revenue and taxes? Beyond our imagination, even now, even in this current term of Parliament, will they need to be addressed in the next few years?
Certainly in favour of mature conversations. I always enjoy having one with Michelle. I think we need to wait and read the report on Thursday. I'm looking forward to it coming out. I'm glad that we have an intergenerational report. It's a very important part of our governance, so we can reflect upon the challenges that are coming our way, and they're serious challenges. I think I agree with Michelle. We do need productivity reform. we also need to look at competition. And there's so many different things that we can do. And my party is in opposition, but I'd certainly like to approach that in a constructive way. We've done that in a bipartisan way on the House Economics Committee that I'm a part of. We've got a review into competition and productivity, which is underway. So there's lots of things that we need to do, because if we don't make Australia a place that business wants to invest, then we won't get the skills and wages and then the tax revenue that's needed to provide for people in the way that they deserve.
I think historically and currently, Keith, there have been two schools of thought about trying to address future service and revenue needs. One is the big wholesale tax reform, you know, a la Ken Henry report back in the day. The other is incremental change from parliament to parliament, from government to government. Philosophically, I take it you'd fall in the latter group, would you?
Not necessarily. I still remember as a citizen looking at the reforms in 1998 under the Howard government, the GST and other reforms. I thought that was very bold. It was risky, but it really increased productivity and set us up well. If there is a case for that wide-scale reform, of course we should look at it. So I'd never rule anything in or out, but we need to make our spending more efficient and get more bang for our buck. And there's many different ways that you can do that within a variety of portfolios.
All right, there's a bit of common ground between both of you there. And yeah, on that question, I get the impression, Michelle, that, you know, leaders of your own government are probably curtailing their ambition for tax reform in this parliament, perhaps to address it in subsequent ones if you get the opportunity. You comfortable with that?
Look, taxation reform is needed, and it's the duty of governments, whether Liberal or Labor, to have that conversation with the Australian people. Certainly, in 40 years from now, it could be either one of us inheriting this issue. So it absolutely speaks to a need for having a bipartisan approach to having a mature conversation around taxation reform. I mean, our mandate, though, going into this election was really around multinational tax, introducing a PRRT, increasing that at least, and then looking at increasing, going after big tobacco. So, you know, that's what we have taken to the Australian people. And of course, we've made some changes to the concessions around superannuation. But, you know, I think larger tax reform is a conversation, and you certainly have to take people along with you in that respect. And, you know, you've got to earn that mandate from the Australian people. All
right. Why don't we change tack and move over to energy now with, I think, some particular cases at work in your own state of Victoria. The head of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation has acknowledged in remarks on the ABC yesterday that there will be an impact on what we take to be rural landscapes and outlooks in your state in particular. Keith Wolahan, has that conversation, you know, been managed effectively and communicated properly to Victorians? And if not, whose primary responsibility is that? Is it those who build transmission lines? Is it the federal government? Is it the Victorian government?
I think that conversation hasn't been properly communicated in Victoria and throughout the nation. We have a serious challenge to meet our renewable target, and there are consequences for that in terms of the infrastructure that has to be built and the timetable that's required to build it. And I still, for the life of me, don't understand why this government has closed its mind to even considering nuclear power being a part of that. And I'm actually quite grateful that the coalition has opened its mind to that, because we take climate change seriously, and because we take it seriously, that is on the table. And many other nations around the world are doing that, from Canada, the United States, and no one would suggest that those administrations are right-of-centre administrations, Finland, Sweden, France. We are an outlier, and I think there are consequences for that, including the excessive infrastructure that will have to be built that will scar the landscape in Victoria and elsewhere.
So is it your assertion, I don't want to sort of get into a full-scale nuclear power debate here, Keith, but is it your assertion that these small modular reactors don't require the transmission lines that are currently envisaged for, you know, what are primarily renewable projects?
Well, it depends where you build them. And what we're seeing in other countries, including in Ontario and Wyoming, is that they've been used to replace the infrastructure that exists for coal-fired power stations, where the land is already set aside, the transmission lines are already there. And in fact, they bolt into the generating system that exists already. So there's a lot of efficiency savings. You've also got a workforce ready to retrain and be employed in those areas. So I think given that we rely on coal heavily in Victoria, Victoria in particular is primed to have that infrastructure used with small modular reactors.
All right, how well prepared do you think rural Victorians have been, Michelle, when it comes to blight on the landscape, you know, the erection, and some of it hasn't even begun yet, but erecting large towers and stringing cables from them. There's a long way to go and already quite a bit of pushback, would you agree?
I think that we've heard rural communities, particularly in Victoria, quite dissatisfied with the process of consultation, and I think those concerns are legitimate, actually, whereas that hasn't played out in other states in Australia, suggesting that there needs to be an improvement in the actual process. What I will say this is that, you know, communities both in the regions and in the cities understand that there is no transition without transmission, and indeed, when we went into the election, we committed to rewiring the nation. It's a $20 billion capital fund designed to modernise the electricity grid down the East Coast in order to pump those green electrons from the regions and into communities all around this country. So we want to do that, but we also want to make sure that we put communities at the centre of the consultation process. And that's why we've undertaken a community engagement review. A report will be delivered in December of this year. We've also developing best practice guidelines on how that engagement should take place. The key being that communities need to be put at the centre. And finally, we're changing the rules. This is a tangible outcome. We're changing the rules to ensure that communities are actually engaged from the get-go, from the very beginning. And because we understand that you get the best outcomes when it's community-led, when it happens from the onset, and that leads to much better policies down the track, much like the Voice will as well.
Yeah, sure. It can also be money, can't it, Michelle? Because I know when you house a wind turbine on your farm, it is financially more attractive for that landowner than running a transmission line through. There's a great imbalance to be addressed here financially, isn't there?
Well, actually, I've been to a wind, farm, and I was made a patron of that farm, actually, which is nice because I was so impressed with the whole setup. But the farm actually gets a lot of benefits, apart from the monetary benefit, the revenue stream. Yeah. Roads are also built, and the wind turbines are very quiet. They don't really disturb anyone, and then there are benefits to the wider community as the company actually then starts to fund various other like sporting teams and schools and other community activities. So there are benefits not only to the farmer but to the wider community, and of course it attracts jobs and skilled workers.
All right.
Do you want me to take on nuclear? I'm very happy to.
I think we won't. I mean, Keith would probably relish it, but we'd go down a mine we may not get out of there if we get too deep into nuclear. Very, very quickly though, Keith, on transmission lines, to my point about the relativities between what's paid to host a wind turbine and what you get as a landowner when these lines cross your property. Does that need to be addressed by the transmission firms?
I think it does. And Michelle, brought attention to something that's quite obvious, is that the market ends up deciding how these things are incentivised and where the money is invested. And again, I'll come back to nuclear. We just want to let the market have a say so those risks can be taken and it's part of the mix. So that if there's a choice between scarring pristine landscape in Victoria or using existing infrastructure, which small modular reactors can do, we'd like that to be on the table.
Okay, well, here's my undertaking. Next time we get you both back, we'll do the nuclear debate and we might do tax as well, because somehow I think that one will keep looping around too. Keith Wolahan, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, thanks both for joining us once again.
Thank you.